John Parker was an ordinary man living in an otherwise quiet suburban neighborhood. But to him, the small lake nestled at the center of the community was anything but ordinary. It was his sanctuary. After grueling work weeks, stressful meetings, and endless city noise, John found peace in the simple pleasure of fishing. The calm water, the gentle rustle of the trees, and the patience of waiting for a bite gave him a sense of freedom he couldn't find anywhere else. Every Saturday morning, John would grab his old fishing rod, his lucky tackle box, and head to the lake just behind his house. No one bothered him here. The neighborhood kids played at the playground nearby. Couples strolled hand in hand, but John was alone with the water and the fish. It was his escape, his little piece of paradise. But that peaceful routine shattered one sunny morning. John had just settled by the edge of the lake, cast his line, and closed his eyes, soaking in the tranquility, when he heard a sharp voice behind him. "Sir, you need to stop fishing immediately," a stern woman said, her arms crossed tightly. Behind her stood two men in crisp uniforms emblazoned with the HOA's logo. John opened his eyes, confused. "Excuse me. This is a violation of community rules," the woman said firmly. "Fishing at the lake is strictly prohibited without a permit, and permits are not currently being issued." John's heart sank. "I didn't know. No one told me." She shook her head. "That's not our problem. You're trespassing on restricted property." John's mind raced. The lake was inside the neighborhood. How could it be off limits? Hadn't the HOA encouraged residents to enjoy the common areas? Yet here they were, ordering him to leave, making him feel like a criminal. "Is there a sign or a notice anywhere?" John asked, scanning the area. He saw nothing. "No official notice is necessary. The rules are clear and binding," the woman replied coldly. John packed up, feeling a strange mix of confusion and anger. Something about this didn't add up. Why was fishing suddenly banned? And why had he never heard about it before? That afternoon, as John sat in his living room, the words "strictly prohibited" echoed in his mind. He pulled out his HOA handbook, scanning every page, but found no mention of fishing restrictions. He called the HOA office, only to be met with vague answers and a refusal to provide any official documentation. The lake, his peaceful refuge, had become a battlefield. That night, John lay awake, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. The HOA's sudden crackdown felt like a power play. But why? What were they hiding? As he drifted to sleep, one thought burned in his mind. He wasn't going to let this go quietly. Despite the warning, John's love for fishing was too strong to give up so easily. The lake was his escape, and he felt no harm was done by quietly casting a line here and there. Maybe the HOA rules were harsh, but fishing was harmless, just a simple way to relax. One early morning, before the neighborhood stood awake, John quietly slipped out with his fishing gear. The mist hovered over the water, and the sun's first rays painted the lake golden. He found his favorite spot and cast his line, feeling the familiar calm wash over him. But this time, the peace was short-lived. Suddenly, footsteps approached from behind. John turned to see two men he recognized from the HOA security patrol. They looked stern, carrying a clipboard and a camera. "You again," one said, his voice low but firm. John swallowed hard. "I didn't think anyone would mind if I fished quietly." The men exchanged glances. "It's against the rules. We have a complaint from a neighbor about disturbance." John blinked, confused. He hadn't made a sound. No loud noises, no trash, no damage. Just fishing. Minutes later, John returned home to find an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a notice, a fine of $250 for violating the HOA's lake regulations. Shock turned to frustration. John called the HOA office, demanding a clear explanation. "Fishing is peaceful," he argued. "Why am I being targeted?" The HOA representative was curt. "Rules are rules. The fines are standard for repeat violations. If you continue, the penalties will escalate." John felt isolated. Some neighbors whispered sympathy, but others avoided him. A few even hinted that the HOA was notorious for heavy-handed enforcement, keeping residents under tight control. He realized this was bigger than just fishing. The lake, once a place of calm, had become a symbol of conflict, a test of authority. Determined not to be bullied, John attended the next HOA meeting, hoping to speak up. But the meeting was a closed-door affair. When John asked for a chance to address the board, he was politely but firmly dismissed. The community leaders seemed more interested in maintaining order than hearing concerns. The tension grew. John's frustration simmered beneath the surface, but he kept fishing, carefully, secretly, until one afternoon a neighbor confronted him sharply. "I saw you fishing again," she said, eyes cold. "You're selfish, ruining it for all of us." John's heart sank. The community he loved was fracturing, divided by invisible lines drawn by the HOA's mysterious rules. He realized something else. The punishment wasn't just about rules, it was about control. Late that night, John sat at his kitchen table, staring at the fine notice. The words "disturbing community peace" echoed in his mind, mocking him. He knew the fight was far from over, and in fact, it was only just beginning. John sat at his desk, surrounded by papers, notebooks, and his laptop screen glowing softly in the dim light. Determined to get to the bottom of the fishing ban, he plunged deep into the HOA's official documents. Hours passed as he scored every page of bylaws, meeting minutes, and property deeds, but the more he searched, the murkier things became. There was no clear, written rule explicitly banning fishing at the lake. What he found instead were vague clauses about unauthorized activities and maintaining community standards, written in language so broad it could mean almost anything. But nowhere did it specifically mention fishing or even outdoor recreation restrictions. Curiously, the HOA's meeting minutes, normally public records, were incomplete for the past 2 years. Pages were missing or redacted, as if someone had deliberately hidden details. John's suspicion deepened. He called other homeowners, asking if anyone had seen a formal announcement or signage banning fishing. Most shook their heads. One elderly woman whispered, "They've always been secretive about the lake. I heard rumors, but no one knows the full story." That night, John decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, hoping for answers. But this time, he wasn't prepared for what he'd find. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a room filled with polished wood and pristine windows. Residents gathered quietly, but John noticed something strange. The usual warmth and openness of community gatherings was missing. The board members sat stiffly behind a long table, faces stern, eyes wary. When John stood up to ask about the fishing restrictions, the room fell silent. The HOA president, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, leaned forward. "Mr. Parker, the rules are clear and have been enforced for years to protect the lake's ecosystem and preserve community harmony." John pressed, "If that's true, why was I never informed? Why no signage or official notice?" Margaret's smile was tight. "Some things are better left unsaid. We expect residents to respect the community's values without constant reminders." John felt a chill. Was this about preserving harmony or preserving power? After the meeting, John spoke privately with a board member rumored to be more sympathetic. The man lowered his voice. "The lake has a history, some disputes, lawsuits years ago. The board wants to avoid any new problems, so they keep the rules vague and enforcement strict. It's a way to control use without inviting legal trouble." John's mind raced. Was the HOA hiding something darker, perhaps about the lake's ownership or a past scandal? That night, he returned to the lake's edge, staring into the dark water. The still surface reflected the moonlight, but beneath, secrets churned. John knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about exposing the hidden truths the HOA desperately wanted buried, and he was ready to dig deeper, no matter what it took. The more John dug, the more the tangled web of the HOA's control over the lake began to unravel. He spent nights researching property records, legal documents, and even past court cases involving the community. What he uncovered stunned him. The lake itself wasn't owned by the HOA or the neighborhood association at all. It was privately owned, and the owner was looking to sell. This revelation struck John like lightning. The very thing the HOA claimed to control was actually up for grabs. If the lake wasn't theirs, then who was behind this iron grip on fishing and access? More importantly, could John seize control before the HOA did? A daring plan formed in his mind, one fueled by frustration and a burning desire for justice. If he could buy the lake himself, he could rewrite the rules. No more fines, no more secret restrictions. It would be his domain, and he would finally have the freedom to fish whenever he pleased. But the risks were enormous. The lake was a major community asset, and the HOA wouldn't stand idly by if a single homeowner tried to wrest control. What if they tried to block the sale? Or worse, retaliate in ways he couldn't imagine? John weighed his options carefully. He called a trusted real estate lawyer who confirmed the lake was indeed on the market. It's rare for a homeowner to buy a communal lake, the lawyer said. But if you're serious, the process is straightforward, if you can afford it. John's savings were modest, but he was ready to take a leap. He talked to banks, friends, and family, explaining his vision. Some thought he was crazy, but others admired his courage. He even started crowdfunding quietly, sharing his story online without revealing too many details. The neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Some said John was plotting something big. Others whispered that he was just wasting his time. But John kept his plan close, focused, and determined. The day of the auction arrived, charged with tension. The lake's ownership would be decided in a room packed with potential buyers, including representatives from the HOA, who had clearly caught wind of John's intentions. John's heart pounded as the bidding war began. Every increment pushed the price higher, but John refused to back down. He remembered every unfair fine, every whispered insult, every locked gate that kept him from his peace. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the auctioneer's hammer slammed down. John had won. For a moment, the room was silent. Then murmurs erupted. Shock, disbelief, and resentment filled the air. The homeowner who had been punished for fishing was now the lake's owner. John left the auction with papers in hand and a fire in his chest. The battle had shifted. Now, the HOA had to answer to him. As he looked back at the neighborhood from his car, John knew the fight was far from over. But for the first time, he held the power. News of John's audacious moves spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The quiet man who had once been an easy target of fines and warnings had just bought the lake, the very heart of the community. Whispers turned into shocked conversations. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, trying to make sense of what had happened. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was electric. The board members, usually composed and unshakable, now wore looks of disbelief and fury. Margaret, the HOA president, stared daggers at John as he calmly walked into the room, holding the legal papers that proved his ownership. "You can't be serious," Margaret said, voice trembling with anger. "That lake is part of the community. You can't just take it away from everyone." John smiled, steady and confident. "Actually, I can. I legally own it now. And that means I make the rules." The room erupted with heated protests. Some residents sided with the HOA, fearing loss of their peaceful access to the lake. Others admired John's boldness, feeling he had finally stood up to an oppressive board. But the conflict was far from simple. The HOA claimed the sale was illegitimate, promising to challenge John's ownership in court. Threats of legal battles hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, John began drafting new rules for the lake. He banned all fishing and recreational use by HOA members unless they had his explicit permission. No more secret fines, no more vague restrictions, just clear boundaries. The community reacted with outrage. "He's selfish." Some yelled, "He's ruining our neighborhood." Others claimed. But John had a deeper reason beyond just defiance. One afternoon, as John stood by the water's edge, a neighbor approached cautiously. "Why do you hate us so much?" she asked quietly. John looked at her, his eyes calm but resolute. "I don't hate anyone. I just wanted to fish. When they punished me for that, I realized this was about control, not rules, so I took control." That night, tensions escalated. Some residents tried to sneak onto the lake, ignoring John's ban. Security cameras caught a few trespassers, leading to warnings and police involvement. John felt the neighborhood fracturing, friendships strained, and trust broken. But he refused to back down. The lake, once a symbol of community harmony, had become the battleground of a fierce war for freedom and control. As John watched the sunset over his newly owned lake, he understood this was only the beginning. The real fight was yet to come, and he was ready. The morning after John's announcement, the community awoke to a new reality. The lake, the neighborhood's cherished gathering spot, was no longer theirs to freely enjoy. Instead, it was John's domain, ruled by his newly imposed regulations. Bright, official-looking signs appeared overnight at every entrance to the lake. Private property, no trespassing without owner's permission, and fishing prohibited except by permission of owner. John personally placed them, his message clear and unyielding. At first, many residents refused to accept it. The HOA sent out angry newsletters condemning John's actions, calling him selfish and divisive. Rumors spread that the HOA was preparing lawsuits, and some homeowners whispered about organizing a petition to force John to sell the lake back. But John stood firm. He sent polite but firm letters to neighbors, explaining his rights as the owner and his desire to protect the lake from abuse and neglect, which, in his mind, the HOA had allowed to happen through poor management. The divide in the neighborhood deepened. Some neighbors supported John, quietly grateful that someone was finally challenging the HOA's iron grip. They saw his ownership as a chance to bring transparency and fairness to lake access. Others, however, were furious. During the weekends, the lake, once bustling with families fishing, swimming, and picnicking, grew eerily quiet. Children played further away. Couples walked the trails but stayed clear of the water's edge. One afternoon, John spotted a small group of neighbors lingering suspiciously by the lake. When he approached, they quickly scattered, leaving behind empty soda cans and discarded fishing lines tangled in the bushes. The next morning, John found his security cameras had been tampered with. The wires were cut, and a note was left pinned to the signpost. "Stop messing with our community or face the consequences." John felt a chill. This wasn't just a fight over fishing anymore. It was becoming personal. Despite the threats, John refused to back down. He installed new, more sophisticated cameras and hired a private security guard to patrol the lake during peak hours. He even reached out to local authorities for support, emphasizing that his property rights must be respected. At the next neighborhood gathering, tension was palpable. Neighbors exchanged cold glances and whispered behind their hands. Some avoided John entirely, while others attempted to engage him cautiously. Yet John remained calm and resolute. "I didn't want this battle," he told a concerned neighbor who asked if peace could be restored. "But sometimes, when the system punishes you unfairly, you have to take matters into your own hands." As dusk fell over the quiet lake, John stood alone at the water's edge. The surface shimmered under the fading light, serene and untouched. But beneath that calm, the storm was brewing. John knew the battle for the lake, and the neighborhood's soul, was far from over. The tension in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. Frustration had simmered for months, but now it exploded into open rebellion. One evening, under the cover of darkness, a group of neighbors gathered at the edge of the lake. Flashlights bobbed through the trees. Whispered voices carried on the breeze. They had organized a secret meeting, a protest not just against John, but against what they called his hostile takeover of their beloved lake. Led by a vocal neighbor named Karen, who had once been a friend to John, but now regarded him as a threat, the group planned to reclaim the lake by any means necessary. "We can't let one man destroy what took decades to build," Karen whispered fiercely. "We need to send a message. No more bans, no more fences. This is our home." As the meeting progressed, the group hatched a plan to remove John's no trespassing signs and sneak back onto the lake to fish and swim freely. They even talked about filing a lawsuit to challenge his ownership. But John wasn't unaware of the growing unrest. His new security system recorded every suspicious movement, every whispered conversation, and his private guard patrolled the perimeter, ready to intervene. The night of the planned protest arrived. Shadows moved stealthily through the woods. A few dozen neighbors, armed with fishing poles and determination, crept toward the lake. But as they reached the water's edge, John and his guard appeared from behind the trees. "Enough," John called out, his voice firm but calm. "This lake is private property. You are trespassing." Karen stepped forward, defiant. "We won't be bullied. This is our community, and we will not be locked out." John sighed. "I never wanted a fight, but I can't let anyone use my property without permission." Tensions escalated, voices raised in anger and frustration. The police were called, and the scene grew chaotic. Some neighbors argued for John's rights, others for communal access. In the days that followed, the neighborhood fractured further. Friendships shattered. Community events were cancelled. The once tight-knit group was now divided by an invisible wall of anger and resentment. John watched helplessly as the place he loved turned into a battleground. But amid the chaos, a quiet realization settled in his mind. Control wasn't enough. Ownership wasn't enough. If the lake was to truly be a place of peace and joy, it would require something far more difficult: trust. And maybe, just maybe, a new way forward. The days following the community uprising were filled with tension, uncertainty, and endless conflict. But just as the neighborhood seemed beyond repair, something unexpected happened, something that no one saw coming. One morning, John received a mysterious letter slipped under his door. It was unsigned, but the handwriting was elegant, deliberate. "Meet me at the lake's dock at midnight, alone. Come with an open mind." Curiosity and caution battled inside John's chest. Who could it be? A secret ally? A foe? The mystery only deepened his resolve. At the stroke of midnight, John arrived at the dock. The moonlight shimmered on the still water, casting long shadows. He waited silently, heart pounding. From the darkness emerged an elderly man with a kind but tired face. "John," he said softly, "I'm Thomas. I was once the owner of this lake." John's eyes widened. "You sold it?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, many years ago, to fund a community project that never materialized. I've watched from afar as the lake became a battleground. It breaks my heart." Thomas revealed secrets hidden from the HOA and residents alike. The lake's true history, its fragile ecosystem, and the deep responsibility of ownership. He explained that the lake was never meant to be controlled by one person or group, but was a shared treasure for the community, if only they could find a way to come together. Moved by Thomas's words, John realized that his fight wasn't about ownership or power. It was about healing. The next day, John called for a neighborhood meeting. This time, it wasn't a battle but an invitation. Standing before a divided crowd, John shared Thomas's story and his own journey, the frustrations, the fines, the fight, and the revelation that unity was the only path forward. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Neighbors listened, eyes softening, anger fading. Together, they forged a new agreement. The lake would be managed by a community trust, with shared ownership and responsibility. Rules would be clear, fair, and enforced with transparency. Fishing would be allowed again, with respect for the environment and each other. The HOA agreed to step back, ceding control to the trust. For the first time in months, the lake was alive with laughter, splashing, and the peaceful hum of community. John stood at the water's edge, the warm sun on his face, feeling a profound sense of peace. He hadn't just reclaimed his right to fish, he had helped reclaim the soul of the neighborhood. And the greatest surprise? The fight had brought the community closer than ever.